Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. The majority of UN Security Council has opposed US re-impose international sanctions on Iran. In separate letters, 13 countries on the 15-member council rejected the call, saying Washington's move is illegal. They said the US is using a process agreed under a nuclear deal that it quit 2 years ago. The US has recorded 1,060 coronavirus deaths overnight, raising the toll to over 175,000 with 5.6 million infections. While Brazil has reported over 1,000 deaths and more than 30,000 COVID-19 cases in the past 24 hours, bringing the infections tally to 3.5 million. India has registered 945 deaths and the highest number of daily cases, with nearly 70,000 infections as the tally approaches 3 million. In Pakistan, 10 people died overnight, raising the death toll to 6,231, with over 292,000 infections. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 22.8 million people and claimed more than 797,000 lives. Israel says its tanks have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. The Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas military posts in retaliation for a rocket attack. No casualties have been reported so far. The US says it has suspended cooperation with Mali's military following the ouster of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta by the army. Talking to media in Senegal's capital Dakar, US envoy to Sahel region J. Peter Pham said the military ties will remain suspended until the political situation in the country is clarified. Earlier, Mali's military released 2 senior government officials detained during the coup against Keïta. And in football, Sevilla win Europa League for a record 6th time after beating Inter Milan 3-2 in a thrilling final in Cologne. The triumph marks a 4th Europa crown in the past 6 years for the club. News coming in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now we'll start the news bulletin in detail. The majority of UN Security Council has opposed US to reimpose international sanctions on Iran. In separate letters, 13 countries on the 15-member council rejected the call, saying Washington's move is illegal. They questioned the legality of the move as the US unilaterally quit the 2015 Iran nuclear deal in 2018. US envoy for Iran, Rai Cook, said Washington does not need anyone's permission to reimpose the arms embargo on Tehran. The Security Council has 30 days to adopt a resolution to extend the sanctions relief. Otherwise, the measures will automatically come into effect. Washington is set to veto any attempt to extend any such resolution. However, the 2015 treaty also directs the Security Council to consider the views of the member states. It means the body may not have to put up a draft text for voting given overwhelming opposition over it. Now, the US has imposed visa restrictions on 14 Iranian officials, accusing them of gross violations of human rights. In a statement, the US State Department did not name 13 individuals, only designating Hojatullah Khodai Soari as the 14th banned individual. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said as Iran's Evin prison chief, Soari oversaw torture and inhumane treatment of the prisoners. Pompeo referred to the officials as assassins, likely in reference to the killing of Tehran critic Kazim Rajavi in Switzerland in 1990. He said the officials posed as diplomats and silenced the opposition figure on the orders of the Iranian regime. The top US diplomat said Washington will continue to pressure Tehran to treat its own people with dignity and respect. Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping says the China-Pakistan economic corridor holds great importance in forging closer ties with Islamabad. He made these remarks in a letter to Pakistan's President Arif Alvi. Xi said Pakistan and China are all-weather strategic partners who share a special friendship. He said China will continue to work with Pakistan for promotion of peace and development in the region. He said political parties from both sides often carry out friendly consultations and constantly build political consensus. He also hailed Alvi's congratulatory message to the second conference of the CPEC political parties joint consultation mechanism. The platform was established in 2019 between China's Communist Party and major parties of Pakistan. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, COVID-19 active cases have dropped to a record low, with just over 10,000 infected patients remaining in the country. The Health Ministry has reported a recovery rate of over 93% across the country. It said 10 people lost their lives overnight, bringing the total to 6,231. The ministry said nearly 600 people tested positive in the past 24 hours, taking the tally to over 292,000. Meanwhile, a World Health Organization-backed study says 11% of Pakistanis have developed protective immunity against coronavirus. The study suggests that areas with lower immunity rates may be at higher risk for future outbreaks. Now, India has reported a new record of its daily COVID-19 cases, with 69,878 infections in the past 24 hours. This has taken the country's caseload to nearly 3 million. The Health Ministry said 945 people died overnight, bringing the death count to over 55,000. The Indian health sector is heading to the verge of collapse as active cases have reached near 700,000. The ministry said the state of Maharashtra is the worst affected, making up more than 38% of the country's cases. India remains the third worst hit country from the virus pandemic after the US and Brazil. Now, the United States has recorded 1,060 coronavirus deaths overnight, raising the toll to over 175,000 with 5.6 million infections, while Brazil also reported over 1,000 deaths and more than 30,000 COVID-19 cases in the past 24 hours, bringing the infections tally to 3.5 million. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 22.9 million people and claimed nearly 800,000 lives. More details in this report.
Despite multiple countries reporting downwards trend in deaths and cases, the coronavirus pandemic is far from over around the globe. The US has closed lanes at select ports of entry at the border with Mexico and will conduct more secondary checks to curb the spread of the coronavirus. In Mexico, the famous floating gardens of Xochimilco have reopened to visitors after a 5-month lockdown. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization chief says the pandemic will last less than 2 years.
We hope to finish this pandemic before less than 2 years, especially if we can pull our efforts together and with national unity, global solidarity. That's really key, with utilizing the available tools to the maximum and hoping that we can have additional tools like vaccine.
Australia's second most populous state of Victoria has reported 13 new deaths as the cases remain below 200 for the second day straight. In Europe, Germany has issued travel warnings for Brussels and French Guiana following an infection spike in the regions. Meanwhile, in Italy, citizens have headed to the beaches to cool off the heat woes, but fears remain for a resurgence of the virus. Mainland China has reported 22 new imported cases with no domestic transmissions, while in South Korea, 332 cases were reported in the past 24 hours as the country expanded stricter social distancing measures nationwide.
Moving on now, Israel says its tanks have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. The Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas military post in retaliation for a rocket attack. No casualties have been reported so far. The tanks targeted positions of the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades in the raids. Tensions have been rising for over a week as Israel continues to bomb Gaza, accusing Hamas of launching incendiary balloon across the border. Israel has also closed the Karim Abu Salim goods crossing with the Gaza Strip. The United States says it has suspended cooperation with militaries of Mali following the oust of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta by the army. Speaking in Senegal's capital, Dakar, U.S. envoy to Sahel region, John Peter Pham, said the military ties will remain suspended until the political situation in the country is clarified. He said the decision to formally designate the action a coup had to go through a legal review. The U.S. regularly provides training to soldiers in Mali, including several of those who led the coup. Earlier, Mali's military released 2 senior government officials detained during the coup against Keita. The release came as junta leaders held discussions about creating a transitional authority. The UN says it believes Syria peace talks in Geneva can lead to progress, but also cautioned against hopes of a miracle. Speaking in Geneva, U.S. Special Envoy Geir Pedersen said this is the beginning of a long and cumbersome process. He said the talks in Geneva may lead to progress in other areas. Pedersen said he briefed the Security Council about the damage of nearly 10-year-long war. Meanwhile, U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, James Jeffrey, said he will visit Switzerland and Turkey to discuss resolution of the Syrian conflict. Syria has been entangled in a civil war since early 2011 following Bashar al-Assad's brutal crackdown on pro-democracy protests. Now, the UN Refugee Agency has called for renewed solutions for displaced and stateless Rohingya communities inside and outside Myanmar. The Refugee Agency says the answer to the plight of Rohingya lies in Myanmar and in implementation of Advisory Commission's recommendations. It said nearly 900,000 people took refuge in Bangladesh 3 years after the crisis there peaked. UNHCR spokesman Andrej Mahecic said up to 3/4 of the Rohingya people are living outside of Myanmar. He said Rohingya people's safe return will require resuming dialogue between Myanmar authorities and the refugees. The Rohingya are described by the UN as the world's most persecuted people who face fears of attack since dozens were killed in communal violence in 2012. Now, China says the Philippines has undermined its sovereignty by sending a military aircraft near the Spratly Island in the South China Sea. At a media briefing, China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian urged the Philippines to stop these illegal actions immediately. Earlier, the Philippines filed a diplomatic protest over China's alleged illegal confiscation of fish aggregating devices from Filipino fishermen. The Philippines' protest comes amid regional and U.S. concern over Chinese activities in the South China Sea. The acutely ill Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has flown from Siberia to Germany for treatment. On Thursday, Navalny fell into a coma after drinking what his supporters suspect was a poisoned tea. Navalny's aides believe he was poisoned, though Russian doctors said tests showed no trace of any poison. The doctor said Navalny appeared to have a metabolic disorder and suffered a sharp drop in blood sugar levels. Navalny will be treated at the Charité Hospital in Berlin. Now moving to Iraq, where protesters have torched parliament offices in the oil-rich south following the government's inaction after 2 activists were assassinated. Demonstrators burned the outer gate of the entrance to the parliament building in Basra province. Protesters gathered to demand Iraq's parliament to sack the provincial governor. Demonstrators clashed with security forces by hurling Molotov cocktails. It is the most violent incident in Basra since October's mass anti-government demonstrations. The violence comes after activist Reham Yaqub was gunned down in Basra on Wednesday by unidentified gunmen. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Mustafa al-Khadimi is on an official visit to Washington, D.C. to conclude talks to shape the future of the U.S. troops' presence in the country. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, moving on with the news stories. The World Health Organization says the Ebola outbreak in the western part of the Democratic Republic of Congo is of grave concern. In a statement, the UN Health Agency said Ebola cases have reached 100 in less than 100 days in the country. The regional director of the WHO said the outbreak has spread to 11 of the 17 health zones in the country's Equator province. The director said of the 100 cases reported so far, 43 people have lost their lives. The statement said the agency and its partners have helped screen over 640,000 people in the Central African country. Ebola, a tropical fever that first appeared in 1976 in Sudan and Congo, is transmitted to humans from wild animals. In the United States, the raging California fires have killed at least 6 people and injured 43 civilians and firefighters. Governor Gavin Newsom has urged vulnerable communities to evacuate as soon as possible. Newsom said 2 of the wildfires are now the 7th and 10th largest in the state's history. He said more than 12,000 firefighters are battling the blazes. The governor has appealed to Australia and Canada for assistance to extinguish the fires, while relief packages are coming in from the US states as well. Emergency officials said the fires have doubled in size in the past 24 hours, burning 771,000 acres of land. The United States and European Union have announced a deal to cut import tariffs on a small range of products in a sign of easing trade tensions. In a joint statement, the official said the importance of the deal is that it has unleashed positive results everywhere. Under the agreement, the European Union will remove tariffs of 8 to 12% on imports of US lobsters and a small range of other products, whereas the US will have its duties on imports of European glassware, ceramics, disposable lighters and prepared meals. The whole deal is worth around $198 million. The agreement will still need approval from the EU government and the European Parliament. And now it's time for the weather updates across the globe. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.